All right, episode 3, the Aussie Trainer Podcast. I nearly forgot the name of it, so I probably should do more of these. I guess today we're going to be talking about pricing, value, and ego. They're strangely linked. When it comes to pricing and ego, I guess, when a customer's going to come in and say, how much to get this tinted? And we're going to have a conversation about what sort of car is it? We've got a list of questions so we can qualify it. And then you can, or you can brief it by saying, prices starting at $395, $495, $295, whatever the number is. And there's this moment where you're sitting with a customer and you're trying to establish, I guess, confidence, a bit of nearly like a bit of a dominant stance in the conversation. You got to be the professional. You got to know what you're talking about, and you've got to add value to that. So, adding value was always a term I didn't really understand, but we'll get into that a bit later. But the scenario: customer calls or walks in, "Hi, how much to tint my car?" And we can easily be frustrated with that early on. There's a lot of banter online about the special things that customers ask us, right? And that's always a good one, where we don't really know what exactly they're going to react to our pricing structure, and you want to be able to spend enough time with them to, get the details out so you can add value, right? You don't just hit them with a price and then it shuts the door straight away. They're like, oh, this guy's a ripoff, because they might have a preconceived idea about pricing. So when I'm looking at a pricing structure, the first thing I have is it all in writing, because having a reference sheet, that I can go through as a dot point, and then have multiple tiers of films. A lot of guys just want to hit it with, we've got a ceramic, that's our price, that's it. And that's fine. That model works for a lot of shops, particularly if you're already busy. Okay, so the dynamic changes in the position your business is in. If you're low on experience, if you're a fairly new shop and you're trying to win market share, all of these things can be added factors. So I'm going to sort of talk generally, and go across my experience, I guess. That's really the only view I've got. So the customer hears the price and then we wait for their reaction. Okay, so you hit them with a price, $695. It's a Range Rover Sport. It's a premium film, and they're like, whoa, I thought window tinting was a couple $100. So now the customer's on the defense and you're potentially defensive or on the attack yourself, because now they're undervaluing your work. And that's where the ego part comes into it, right? Where you might say, I've been doing this 30 years or whatever the number is, and I spend a lot of time and effort and put it into training, and I value my work highly. None of this shit's free, and then we get in this argument, or it's more of an attack with the customer, right, over their pricing or the effort reward system. The most successful way that I've closed business with customers is adding value by experience. I explained the process, a shortened version, obviously, but I also explain the care, effort, and the expertise going into that job. A lot of that has nothing to do with the film, the brand, the way it's applied, or any of that. It's actually more about, the way it's applied actually is part of it, because that's what I'm going to use as a rule to explain to the customer that it takes hours to do. We have to know all of these tricks, and look, even if you're doing a car that's easier, that you might say, hey, I genuinely think that I can do this quite easily, and I might do it in 20 minutes, but we want to make a 2 or 3 hour booking. Most cars at a professional standard should be under an hour, right? Particularly in a retail, around an hour. And again, generalizing, all right? Because egos get hurt when we talk about window tint and how long it takes and how long it should take. Let me just silence the laptop. I remembered to silence my phone. I didn't, however, put I don't know how to do it. There we go. I could have hit the mute button. Interesting. All right, so when it comes to a customer being defensive or adding value to that, the easiest way to do it is actually explain the process. So I'll say, look, we've got some high-end films. We've been here a long time. We know what it takes to do that job properly. You don't want to go down the road of trying to save money, so then you get a purple old bubbly tint job, right? So I always picture that and talk about the facts of, if you choose that, that's potentially what you're choosing, right? We all know that you can put a film on the car that might be better price point, and it won't potentially go purple and bubbly in the first 5-10 years. And, you know, manufacturers are still going to offer a lifetime warranty because that's become the standard. However, if you show an ad that a performance film, high teaser, actually having a quality film that, you know, has really good clarity, really good performance, you know, minimum low angle haze, all of these things, and I explain to them that there's a lot that goes into it. The solar properties of that, the legalities of it, you know, that changes around the world. So, you know, in a lot of places around the world, you can tint the windscreen. In Australia, you can't. So, you know, we can tint sort of small portions of it. And, of course, our law is written in such a way that it's all open to interpretation. You know, that's and it's one of the things we're working on. We can't even put clear PPF or anything on the outside of the screen to protect it from stone chips and add safety, you know. So bureaucracy really wins that one. However, there's a few people out there working on that, which is great. And explaining these things to the customer is all adding value. Plus, they're getting sick of me talk. They just want to get to the end point. So there's a few things where I might wow them a little bit at first, and then I say, look, if it's your car and it's a price point you're worried about, then let's get a high-performance film, middle of the road, that's still going to get good performance. It's not the top of the range, $1,000 film. And I'll always have a hero film there to actually leverage against. You know, I'll have a $1,000 film always, and some people go for it. So, you know, I never thought I could. I've charged $1,400 just for a tint job, and tint only, no upsells, no coatings, no anything else. And customer was happy, did the job, and they got a hero film. So, you know, the specs were the highest one. It's in their budget. You know, I didn't rip them off. I told them exactly what they're getting, and the film itself was super expensive in comparison to films. So they got what they asked for. There's no rip-off scenario there. However, really why I've got it in stock and why I've got it even on the price list is to have it as a peak hero one that adds value to the other films, right? So if you just go, my hero film's $695 for a standard SUV, then it makes it difficult to make that's your hero film. Does that make sense? Where if you've got a $1,300 film or a $1,000 film, then your $695 has more value because they go, well, maybe I'll just meet in the middle. I still want a high-performance film. Now, of course, there's the naysayers that'll go, you should be charging $100. I've also done the same, right? Where I've probably said it also, you know, until I had a retail space. You know, coming from dealer work where I was only doing $80 labor only, and we'd do as many as we can in a day, and so you could make good money. Well, as I got older and slowed down, I'd much rather commit to doing way less cars, and I'd spend more time on the sales process, adding value. But also what happened was having staff, having overheads, having insurance, having all of these other things that maybe I didn't need when I was charging $100 per car. So on the flip side of it is a lot of detail that goes into that, but protecting that, having a reputation, protecting that as well. You know, it's, what's the saying? You're only as good as your last job, right? So if you're going to do poor work and then not rectify any of those things or not carry a warranty or try and work your way out of problems, then ultimately you're devaluing all of those things. Okay, so that's where ego comes in, I believe. The ego part of it is I'm also happy to walk away from a job rather than discount the work. So say our absolute bottom shelf, it's still a lifetime warranty on the film because the manufacturer carries that, is $295. that's going to be on a standard sedan, right? And I don't recommend doing a lot of those. It's a lot harder work for less money. However, having that there, so we, as a gap filler, as we sort of knock that one out, and it's, the customer's got exactly what they're after. They wanted to film, might not have the performance, and side by side, the specs aren't actually that bad, right? So for a budget-friendly film, and we can't shortcut the install because they're only paying that much. I think the things I would do is put it in spots that are more convenient for the shop, right, to make sure the shop and the workflow continues. However, making sure that those things are coming together and working in a sense where I'd much rather the workers, my staff were sort of standing around and cleaning up, checking process, doing a stock take, doing those things, and doing anything less than $295, right? It's a backwards economy if you're doing it much cheaper than that. Slowing it down and giving the time of day adds value. All of the things that add value, they're sort of the key points, and it actually makes it quite difficult. So I'm going to go back to these points because I can just bang on about that scenario. One of the other things, what a customer sees is their car disappear into this little dark hole and then come back out with tinted windows, and then you explain away the things like water retention and those sort of things. But what they don't see is the glass prep, contamination removal, the tools and experience, but also the controlled environment. So we've got temperature-controlled environments, great lighting, flooring, all of those things, all of the things to maintain those scenarios, right? So that's also important. But the cleaning, are not often, I was going to say misunderstood, but not really. It's having the knowledge across all cars about scraping windows, right? We want to minimize, and I could go on an episode about scraping windows and whether we should or shouldn't, but you want to minimize the amount of damage we could do to a glass, right? We don't want to scratch or remove any coatings or low E coatings or whatever coatings they're putting on glass these days. However, we want to make sure we've removed enough contaminants, right? So I find that's pretty important. However, the customer doesn't need to know all this, right? So you don't need to add those things as value, but they also need to know that it is on you. There's certain things, if, say, a Lexus comes in and it has a coated glass, I will talk to that customer about it. I'll explain that there's decals on there, and if it gets ruined, just removing the decal, taking all due care, then, which hasn't happened in terms of if we just warm it up or steam that off, then we don't really have an issue. But I had a colleague tell me today or yesterday it was, about they didn't want to scour the window. So they actually used their hard squeegee, and it was a Blue Max, and it actually scratched the coating. So, they were trying to minimize using a scraper, but even that scratched the coating. So for me, it's using a non-scratch scourer, is basically, even then I'd be very light with it and squeegee it. And I'd explain to the customer that there could be potential contamination issues. Unlikely. We'll do everything we can, but we don't want to ruin this coating. If you need to remove this tint, we're probably going to have to ruin the coating. We could use some chemicals to soften the adhesive, and there's other ways to go around it. Can't guarantee the coating doesn't get hurt. Now, there's people a lot smarter than me that know more about these things. So if you want to look into those things, definitely not an expert. I've just I've been lucky, I guess, for the most part. So, all right. The ego problem. Installers take price objections personally. Customer questioning price versus attacking you, right? Separating ego from business decisions. Now, I touched on it a little bit then, but basically what I'm saying in those notes are, don't be offended if a customer's shocked. They're just not aware of what it takes to do the job. So it's easy to be short, where if a customer rings up, hey, mate, how much to do this car? And I was like, look, there's a few things that will affect the price. Let's talk about that first, because I might shock you with the price if you just want a straight up price. But I'll also ask their budget, which puts some customers on the back foot. I'm like, what do you want to spend? Because that matters. Do you want to spend $1,500 on a window tint? And they might be like, whoa, didn't know you could. So I said, you don't need to necessarily, but let's talk about it. So open the conversation with those things, like open the channel to have a conversation, right? So price versus value. That's probably what I should call the episode, price versus value. Cheap shops compete on price, professional shops compete on value. Pretty impressed I wrote that in the first place, with help of chat, of course. But what actually creates value in the industry? Name some of the things. Professionalism, uniforms, insurance, shop front, all of these things. Do you have a waiting room? What sort of expectations are the customers having? Do they get to wait while you do the car? Are they watching TV? They got coffee, drinks, all of these things. All of these are adding value to that, right? So if they turn up and they're welcomed with a smile, that adds value. If they stick their head into a tint workshop, I cringe to think what they're going to see, because I've also been that tinter for 30 odd years where I'm like, ugh, customers staring in the workshop. And I don't want to make eye contact with them. They don't with me. And it's this stupid standoff where I'm so focused on work and I don't want to break that focus, that it can then create another list of issues where the customer's like, I don't know where to go. There's no reception, right? So when we're talking about those things, why don't we create a space for the customer to be comfortable having a transaction that involves them being educated on what adds value, right? What we're going to do to their car, what's getting tinted, what's not, what's covered, what isn't, what problems might arise, what to expect after the fact. You're not going to be able to wind your windows down. Is that going to be an issue? Does your air conditioning work? There's a lot of things that I'll talk about. There's some older cars that come in and they might want it done for aesthetics, and then they're like, oh, this car's pretty hot. And I'm like, the car's still going to be hot. However, the heat transfer through the glass is going to be minimized, right? So it's not going to be suddenly like you've got air conditioning now that you've got tint. That honesty in that conversation, even though it might be like, your car's going to be cooler, yes, technically. Your car's not going to be cool necessarily. So having a conversation around that is adding value. Having honesty around that is adding value, okay? So price versus value. If the customer comes in and you're like, yeah, mate, it's $200, and he's like, I don't know what I get for that, and you're like, you get tint, that's devaluing all of those things, okay? So you don't need to go in and hug them, make them a coffee and do all these things. However, adding value brings price up. You can do big value add, minimal cost to your shop, to yourself, to time, to those things. Having a printout adds value. Here's an aftercare sheet. Here's a microfiber and some tint-safe window cleaner that you can come and buy and refill at a discounted rate. Adds value. All of these things add value. Education, having data sheets on the wall, having displays on the wall, all adds value, right? So value versus price. The more value you can add, the easier it is to price a product, okay? If the customer is only chasing price, I generally give them advice on where to go, because there's plenty of people that will do that, right? So I actually saw in one of the chats today, Farhad actually put up a post saying, tint and pricing, how do we close these customers? So that's exactly how. I very rarely, the hardest ones for me to close are the ones I don't want to do, because I tend to, so strip and tint, old cars, anything over 10 years, I don't really push to close them. If we're busy and the calendar's full for weeks, what are we chasing? What are we chasing there? What do I want to fill the calendar with strip and tints? Just the smell of it, the mess, all of those things. I'll price it accordingly so we add value to our shop, right? I don't mind doing a $300 strip and tint on a rear screen if there's not other quality work to do, So education creates value. I already spoke a little bit about that. Explain the process, explain the film, the technology in the film, explain the results. Like I said, what are you going to get? What it will do, what it won't do, adds value. 2 types of customers. You know what's really easy these days? Giving a customer a good experience. walking in, chatting to a customer and saying, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whatever it may be. How are you? And eye contact. If that's not for you, find someone that it's for. You know, we've got a team of people that lean on their strengths for that. That no matter what's going on, they can look up and smile. That changes the room. Recently, a friend of mine, Troy, he mentioned keep the place smelling nice. Imagine you walk into a tint shop and you smell old adhesive. You're like, oh. It already, just the thought of it, the feeling of it actually makes it hard to want to be there, right? So that's not adding value. That's where if you have a nice air freshener, not too overpowering, just a nice balance that you walk into the foyer or the showroom or reception area and it's refreshing. It's bright. It's not too loud. It's comfortable. It's not overloading with noise and smells. So those sensory inputs adds value. Okay. I'm already sick of saying adds value, which is pretty funny. Cheap installs versus professional. I do talk about that with customers. I said, look, there are certain ways we can keep a price point. Say we come in and it's a commuter bus. You know, there's a lot of windows, old style with sliders. What job are you looking for? Are you after like a pre-cut thing where we can sort of speed it up for us and save you a couple of $100? Or is this a $2,000 tint job that you're going to want to customize and you want to look like the glass is painted black, right? So it depends what you want. We could do both, but one comes at an extra cost. So now what I'm doing is adding value to even the cheaper one because I'm showing, look, these are the shortcuts I can do. These are different techniques I can use, but what you're going to have is a gap on the back edge of a slider where they overlap, right? If that doesn't bother you and it might save you a bit of money, saves us a bit of time, you're going to have potentially less contamination. You know, we don't have to pull the windows out. There's all these things that I'll explain to them that, what are you after? And if it's a $10,000 old commuter bus that they're just going to travel in and the windows are getting covered in kitchenette anyway, they're just using it for privacy. Okay, let's do something different. Okay, so again, little investigation, you can work out exactly what they're after. This conversation adds value in that. Okay, so it's a point where the customer can help and decide to choose a different outcome based on their budget, your value, the type of film, and you've pieced together a whole scenario with them, right? The cost of fixing bad installs, another great point. If we put an inferior film on, I refuse to install other people's film. I don't know what it is. I've done it. Okay, I just contradicted myself. I, in the past, have installed films that customers have given to me. We bought the film, can you install it? We ended up charging the same amount, and now the customer's not happy anyway because we use their film. Decreasing value, right? Because as much as I was trying to help and people please by saying, yeah, right, we'll do that. You know, the cost of film wasn't that great in this particular scenario. We'll install your film. It might be harder to install. It might scratch. It might, you know, you might move the adhesive and then it's gone and moved all the dye and now it's not a product you're familiar with. So now it's a cheap, crappy product, but it looks even worse. And now you've still got to charge extra. So yeah, there's a plethora of reasons not to do that. You're a professional, be one, right? So back yourself. Running a professional shop, that adds value again. You know, overheads, insurance, tools, staff, training, materials. So I said, look, if you're looking for cheap, there's guys that are still out there learning, you know, then maybe that suits. And look, if the car warrants that and the customer's chasing a price point, it's not for you. Your shop's full or busy. You know, I used to hear this saying that I could go broke on the lounge, and I was like, what? I didn't really understand what that meant. But the cost of doing the work, instead of being busy, spending all this time, effort, and energy, money, and then not achieving the desired outcome, right? And it can cost your business, right? It costs money to open. It costs money to have the lights on, the insurance, and everything else. Well, you're going to go backwards working, or you might as well sit at home and go backwards. So, yeah, again, it's when customers understand the value, the price stops being the problem. Now, look, cost of living is high and all these other things. If the customer's gotten to my shop and wants to talk about pricing, it's already a negotiation, right? They're already got an expectation where they're going to have to spend money. And I don't want them to overspend. I don't want to blow their budget. I don't want to do any of those things, because ultimately it can lead into, if they think they've overpaid, it's going to lead to bad reviews and poor feedback. So I want them to feel comfortable in making that decision. I don't do discounts. My pricing structure is written. I was looking for something as a bit of a prop, but my pricing structure is written, and I'll be like, here it is, and then show them. And then as they're looking at it, they're like, okay, I've gone and said things in the past to customers where they said, can I do it cheaper? And I've said, why? Give me a good reason, I'll give you a discount. But that was my ego being hurt. I was sick of fighting with customers about price because I didn't understand adding value, right? They were just trying to get a discount, which is fair and reasonable, I guess. Culturally, it was always challenging to me when people asked for a discount. I'd be like, all right, what can you do in return? Now I've come around to going, what can we do to add more value, right? If it's going to get you across the line, we can do an interior, we can do a fabric protection on your mats. We might have excess fabric protection from previous jobs, and we can do their mats, and they're like, oh, okay. So it's a little bit of work. We might even vacuum the mats, give it a tidy up. It's adding value, right? We've still got our full ticket price. However, it's added some value to the customer. Everyone feels happier. They got something for free. There's some of those things. Also, another thing I do with those high-ticket items, I do little giveaways where it's a gift pack, cleaners. I went through a run where I actually did those pop-up, fold-up sunshades. I put those in the car, and it come with, it had our branding on it. So as you would put and cover the windscreen, I'd say, look, use this. Helps when you jump in your car. Not all the interior is really, really hot. And it's going to cool down a lot quicker when you dash and everything else is covered. But ultimately what they're doing is when they've got that parked, it's got my name across the front of the windscreen. So it's kind of like, two stones, one bird. When it comes to setting pricing, that's one of the real tricky ones. You have to know what it costs to operate a business. I'd say that's a fair statement. Most people in business don't know what it truly costs to run their business, right? I spent many, many, many years just going, if I earn enough, surely it's got to cover it. Break it down. Break it down what it costs per hour to operate in your shop with your staff, what their hourly rate is, so you can break it down in many ways, whatever suits you to sort out, but you can have your floor space that it costs $80 a square meter to have it empty, right? So then there's going to be a cost of having, when somebody's working on it, then the cost of film, all of these added things, they should come down and actually give you a breakdown. Your taxes, your insurances, your electricity, all of these things. And you can have them fairly generalized to still get a fairly accurate pricing structure. That way, when you bang on about it's $295 and you're like, I want to get it cheaper, we're not busy, I want to add this car, do I want to give them a discount from that? That your margin is small in that number. So you might be making $50 on that car as profit. If you give that away, now you're just working for free. Literally, it's costing you as much to operate as it is to break it down in terms of, okay, we paid the bills and we might have paid the rent in that job for that time that it was in the shop. However, it has to make money. You have to profit from it, right? So not just to break even, because you can break even all the time and that becomes the new norm. It actually becomes fun to say, what's our daily target? What's our weekly target? What's our just scrape by? And this is a worry. Let's look at marketing target, right? And what's our capacity? That's the other one. I don't want to come in and went, hey, that's a great week, guys, and everyone's bleeding, and they're all like laying on the floor saying, don't talk to me, because they've and what motivates them. So that might be another one too. Talk to your staff about productivity, what makes them comfortable, how they're going. And it's funny, the boss, staff, worker, contractor scenario, that they should do this and they should do that. And that goes for all directions. A contractor expects this. So I say to a contractor, what makes a good experience for you to be in the shop? And then I'll revert that back to them about what makes them good as a contractor and appreciate it. And maybe, do you want to have a conversation about how we can improve? Do you need more lead time? I need you to clean up. There's rather than saying you're this and I'm that, or they are that and they are this, it is a lot more productive to actually say, how can we do it better? That's the and asking the question instead of saying it, right? It's tough, right? To say, what didn't you like about being at my shop? And be prepared. Be prepared to have your feelings hurt. But they might whinge about things out of your control. Or they might just state things, not necessarily whinge. But they might say, I don't like the trees above the parking spot because it leaves crap on my car. And I'll be like, fair enough. Not much I can do about that. But how about in the shop? How can we improve? How can we make you more comfortable? How can we make you more money so you can make us more money, and then everybody's happier, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff that we can do the pros and cons around, but continually evolve without going, how can a contractor add value? How can a shop add value to their staff? What does add value? What adds a good experience? If the staff are coming in and, some people want to start at 6 a.m. Okay, can we get some overnight cars? Maybe our customers don't want to come in at 6 a.m. And then other guys want to come in or girls want to come in at 9. They might have a school run. How can we help with those things? So have a look at your shop. Look at not only productivity and cost, but also look at your culture. That's an important one. When people are walking in, dragging their feet, looking down or looking at their phones, it's a different thing, right? Culture is a big one. I've worked in many shops around the place, and I've seen some really cool cultures. I've seen some ones where I'm like, oh, it's pretty quiet in here, but the culture's great still. It's just that's the style of shop, right? And then there's other ones where there's music blasting and your ears are bleeding, where that might be motivational and heavy pump because they got 30 cars to do today, but it might not be everyone's jam, right? So back in the early 2000s, we had a pretty wild west, don't get in our way, don't park in our way kind of scenario. But we had super high volume. We couldn't afford to lose 4 minutes, right? There was a job to get done. There was no value. There was insane numbers to do. I remember doing some of our highest volumes that I'd ever thought I would do. When I started, I was hoping that I'd be able to do 5 a day. That was kind of the standard that I understood. Then I met some people that said they could do 10 a day, and I just assumed they were lying. Then I met people that actually did 25 to 30 cars a day as one installer. And again, didn't believe them until you see it happen. And so I was like, I wonder how many I can do. And I think 19 was my record. At least that's what I remember. It's probably more like 14, but over the years the story's embellished a little, and now I can do 140 cars a day by myself. But one of the things that I noticed was my buddy Aaron, and an old staff member of mine, he, aka Shervo, he was cutting hand kits for me. Sorry, he was cutting kits on the bench for me. And as he was doing it, he was like running them over to me, setting them up just so I could just apply film fast, right? So he's like the perfect scenario for picking less steps for me, multiple peel boards, multiple car spots, so I could just move my tools from one vehicle to another. And my memory serves me correctly. It was about 19 cars, and I say I did it solo. Not really. He was doing half the job, right? He's cutting the kids out. Now, a guy next to us, Elvis, he was around 4 p.m., maybe 5 p.m., 6 p.m. I don't know. It's a long time ago. But he was at car 24 at the time, because I remember he did 5 more cars than me, and I was like, some key points in this little story. I was doing the easy cars, right? It was my dealership. He was the hired help as the extra contractor. We had so many cars going out in one day. It was crazy. It was like 50s and 60s day, but back to back to back to back. And it was around late 2000s. And I remember looking at him going like, how are you doing like technically a day's work, 5 more cars than me when I've got help? And I reckon it took 15 years for my ego to be okay with that. I was like, and I used to lean on my tint was a little bit better. I had less contamination. I had less comebacks, no warranties, that sort of thing. And he looked at it differently. He said, and I remember him looking at me and saying, that's easy when I only have to do 1 warranty, but I still made $500 more than you for the day. And I was like, yeah, well, I'm better than you, so my jobs are better. It was so ridiculous. I was like, now when I think about it, he probably made more money than me, right? His ego was like, I don't care. I'm feeding my family more, right? That was the, where there was a mix there. There was a whole mix of let's do as many cars as possible, as clean as possible. Let's give Elvis the hard ones because he's insanely fast. And then Trent running the shop was just like, all right, you boys all sort out your egos. I need 60 cars done. I don't really care who does what and how many and hopefully minimize any sort of issues when it comes to volume, right? So that little rant is welcome to memories of dealer work back in the day. But again, we're doing cars in 15 minutes, right? That was I don't know if they're much faster than that, but, seeing these competitions and knocking out cars quickly, that mistakes happen and you have to sort of limit how much that happens. Adding value and adding cost, to bring this back is adding money back to the shop, adding profit, adding, a good, strong business that's still going to be there in 30 years, that warranty is going to stand because the shop exists. You've got a responsibility to your other good paying customers too, to not lose your shop. So having all of those things played out and understood to be, where was I going with that? To have all your boxes checked and to make sure that everything's still going to be there after the fact. I think it's important that you keep in mind I lost my train of thought there, but I'm still in the realm. I'm like trying not to go on another rant about other dealer days, but having all of those things in line is really going to help have a conversation with the customer, create all of that value, explain to them what it can be and what it can't be, but also knowing that before the conversation. So having a script that you can follow, and you don't follow it to a T. It's like a cheat sheet, like I've been using on the notes. It's look down and go, all right, what are we doing here? What do we have? What do we need? What can we change? What can we evolve? Also, what do my staff need? Are they feeling burnt out? So maybe I'm like, $295, I'd rather give them an early mark because that's going to add value to my shop long term, right? So, hey guys, we're done for the day. I'll close up from here. I won't book any more work in. Have an early mark, beat traffic. They go, you know what, that's pretty cool. As long as you've got the good culture, right? If they're just going to take advantage of it, then, that's a different conversation once again. So there's many different things to add to these things, but when it comes to pricing, work out what your costs are. Work out your volume. That's going to matter. Work out your capacity. Work out how many you want to do a day. But add value, and then you can add add-ons to create more revenue. Okay, so there's obviously many layers of this, and I'm going to rant on about a lot of these things that I've learned over the time. I'm also saying that this isn't a blanket rule. I'm not telling you how it works. I'm telling you what works for me. Okay, so and what's worked for me and what I've changed from, what I think works well now, and so it's a long road to go down. There's lots of stuff to talk about, particularly around value and value adds. But look at your own process, document it. Say, okay, let's see where this will go. Let's see what will happen. Let's see how many different things I can modify or adjust in my vernacular with that customer. So really going through and actually having a sidekick and go, like a witness to the process, going, so what do you think? And you can even have them busy behind the desk doing something else, just listening in, just saying, so what do you think? How'd I go? How could I improve? Do you reckon I could have got them for more? Do you reckon that I did the right thing? Do you think that went well? And most of the time it's great, and it's small little tweaks that starts to add to your script or your value add process, where next thing you know, you're going, I didn't know that was possible. Like, go back to that volume of cars analogy, where I thought you could do 5 cars a day, and now you can do 25. Well, I can't do 25 retail cars a day. I wish I could, per tinner. However, we did a charity day, and I think it was over 100 cars. So, in a shop, in a small shop, and it was all knock them out the park. It was a bushfire relief thing. It was the customers understood what they were getting. They weren't getting value per se. I guess they were getting value on a price point. However, they understood that, right? Expectations were set. So keeping all of those things in mind, I think, is an important factor when it comes to setting your pricing, but backing your pricing and understanding where it can improve, where you can perhaps modify some of those things to give you a desired outcome. Does that make sense? So write down what you're doing, script it out how it is now, script out the things you like. But what it'll also do, when it empowers you to back your shop, and I do it as a responsible business owner, I would have that conversation around, look, I got to do the right thing by my business, my family, my staff. That ultimately, when you're having these conversations with the customer, all of that stuff is like your backup, if that makes sense, right? Where if your only backup is a price you've made up in your head, then it can easily flex, right? So you can go, all right, I want to win this conversation, so I'm going to say, let's just get you booked in for $250 instead of $295. I would much rather go, we don't have a $295 film for someone that's, choose your customer is what I'm saying there. If they're going to harass me on a $295 price, they're already wasting my time and money. So I'd much rather pull away and say, I'm good. I'm all right. We're okay. We're busy. We're booked out. So, but I can say it in a sense that we might not lose them as a customer. They're just chasing their own perception of value. So I'm like, no, that's not what we do here. In our area, we've had multiple shops close down over a couple of decades where they can't hold that price point. It makes sense. Why would they? Why would they work harder for less? So, keep that in mind. Back your shop. Back the things that support your shop and your business. Make sure that for you and your customers that they understand what they're getting, set their expectations, but set yours first before you talk to them. So, having a conversation with a customer, I know what we're going to talk about before they get there. And you've done it enough times that you can say, good afternoon, what do we need? You're in a hurry? Cool, let's get through it quickly. Or, have you got some time? I'll talk to you about it. I live and breathe this industry, so careful if you want to open that can of worms about, I want to talk about window tint, I want to talk about your expectations as a customer, I want to deliver the highest quality we can, I want to do all of these things. However, I want to also make sure that all of those factors are looked after, and I'm going to have them scripted out in my head. I'm going to have them worked out on paper prior, so I know what I need to do, and then it comes across in that authoritative sense without talking down to a customer. I'm just educating them on what we need, what they need, and then come to a common party and get the transaction done. There's some customers like, I don't care, man, I need 20% on those back doors. That's all I need. I was like, cool, here's the price, and they're like, cool. And then it's, that's just transactional. That's fine. But price, we're talking about price point and value, those two things. So hopefully this rant that I've covered in enough angles. If you do have questions, please just put them in the comments. It's a brand new YouTube channel. I'm going to push it. I'll see how it goes, but I'm not going to stop. I'm going to rant here because some of these videos I can send out, with I'm constantly training and teaching people. I've already used the current videos to actually send them out, chop them up a bit, but also send them out to newcomers because they're not necessarily going to, coming from trade to retail, I didn't deal with customers. So I wish I knew all these things before, I could tint fine and I could get film on glass, but I was like, how am I going to charge over $200? It's crazy to think back. And I'm like, how could I only do it for $200? That was because I had to educate myself on it first, and then I used to go like, somebody charges $1,000, they must be ripping them off. And I was like, no, it's not that at all. It's actually I wish I could charge every customer $2,000, but that's not the market. Let's keep it competitive. If I get a customer that opens up next to me and does it cheap, say a shop opened up next door, right? Nightmare scenario, shop turns up, they just go advertise $99 tints. I'd be like, if you want a $99 tint, go get it. It's right there. If you want what we give, which is XYZ, add value. That's kind of how simple it is, simplified. Right, this is the Aussie Trainer. Even my dog's over at this point. She's getting up for a stretch. So thank you. Appreciate you listening to me ramble on a Sunday afternoon again. And subscribe too. Subscribe and share. This is kind of a niche podcast. It's going to be talking about window tinting, PPF, vinyl wrapping. The price point one come up quickly today. It come up multiple times, but we deal with it on a regular basis too. So making sure that you're adding value, I think, is the key here. Cool. All right. Peace, and thanks for watching.